ददाति स्वापदन्तिकं वन्देऽहं श्रीगुरु श्रीयुतपदकमलं श्रीगुरुन् वैष्णवांश्च श्रीरूपं सागरजातं सागना रघुनाथान्वितं सजीवं साद्वैतं सावधूतं परिजनसहितं कृष्णचैतन्यदेवं श्रीराधाकृष्णपादान् सागना ललिता श्रीविशाखान्वितांश्च हे कृष्णा करुणा सिंधु दीनबंधु जगतपते गोपीशा गोपिका कांता राधा कांता नमस्ते तप्तकांचन गौरांगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये वंशकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्येव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः श्रीकृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौरभक्तवृंद हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय हरे कृष्णा श्रीमद् भागवतम Canto 1 Chapter 12 Text 27 तक्षकात् आत्मनो मृत्युं द्विजपुत्रोपसर्जितात् प्रपश्यता उपश्रुत्य मुक्तसङ्गपदं हरे 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 Synonyms Takshakat by the snake bird, Atmanaha of his personal self, Mrityum, death, Dvijaputra, the son of a Brahmana, Upasarjitat, being sent by, Prapachyate, having taken shelter of, Upaskrutya, after hearing, Muktasanga, freed from all attachment, Padam, position, Hari, of the Lord. Translation After hearing about his death, which will be caused by the bite of a snake bird sent by a son of a Brahmana, he will get himself freed from all material attachment and surrender unto the personality of Godhead, taking shelter of him. So this is from verse 27 of chapter 12. So as seen in the previous verses in this chapter, uh, the Brahmanas who were present at the birth ceremony of Maharaja Parikshit, they were all making predictions about uh, the life of Maharaja Parikshit. In the previous verses, uh, there were many comparisons being made between Maharaja Parikshit and also many other exalted and glorified personalities about how Maharaja Parikshit will turn out to be as glorious, if not even more glorious than those exalted personalities. And at this point, uh, it has come to the prediction about how Maharaja Parikshit will meet his death uh, through the bite of the snake bird Takshak. Uh, so, in this verse, it is being described that the curse by the son of Brahmana, uh, the son of a Brahmana would curse Maharaja Parikshit to die in 7 days due to this bite by the snake bird. And after knowing about the curse, and also after knowing that he has only 7 days to live, Maharaja Parikshit will renounce his kingdom and take shelter in the Shravanam of Krishna Katha. So this is from chapter 12. In the later part of this canto, in the final chapters, this event is described in detail about how Maharaja Parikshit earned the wrath of this son of a Brahmana, and how uh, he he renounced his kingdom and um, participated and went to the banks of the Ganga to hear Krishna Katha or Srimad Bhagavatam from Sukadeva Goswami. Purport: material attachment and taking shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord go ill together. Material attachment means ignorance of transcendental happiness under the shelter of the Lord. Devotional service to the Lord while existing in the material world is a way to practice one's transcendental relation with the Lord, and when it is matured, one gets completely free from all material attachment and becomes competent to go back home, back to Godhead. So, similar to what has been described by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna, in the Gita itself, uh, this material world is dukkhalayam, and it is not possible to experience transcendental happiness in this material world, which is full of dualities. So it is also this comparison between the material world and the spiritual world is has also been given by the Supreme Lord in chapter 15 of the Gita, uh, titled Purushottama Yoga. So in that chapter, uh, in chapter 15 of the Gita, verse 5, the Supreme Lord says, Nirmana Moha Jidasanga Dosha Adhyatma Nitya Vinutta Kama Dvandvair Vimukta Sudukta Sanjit Gachanti Amuta Padamaviyam Tat. Then in the next verse, the Supreme Lord describes about the spiritual world in 15.6. Uh, the Supreme Lord says, Natad Bhashyati Suryo Nashashanko Napavakaha Yat Gatva Nanivartante Taddama Paramam Mama. So, right from the beginning of chapter 15, the Supreme Lord talks about this comparison between the uh, material world and the spiritual world. Even in the first verse, the Supreme Lord talks about the comparison uh, in 15.1. Urdhva Moolam Adashakam Ashwattam Pravaroyam Chandamsi Ashtaparnani Yastam Vedasa Vedavid. So, this material world is regarded as the perverted reflection of the spiritual world. So, it is not possible for any living entity to experience transcendental happiness in this material world. The the meaning of the word transcendence is also explained by the Supreme Lord in the same chapter, because in this material world it is full of dualities like profit loss. Though we may experience happiness for some time, distress will follow as long as we are trapped in this material world, regardless of which type of material body we are in. So we are sure to experience the four basic problems of life: Janma, Mrityu, Jara, Vyadhi. And uh, even between Janma and Mrityu, apart from experiencing the problems of Jara, Vyadhi, we'll also be going through cycles of these dualities like profit, loss, happiness, and distress. And therefore, as long as we are trapped in this material entanglement, it's not possible to experience transcendental happiness. The transcendental happiness or transcendental bliss is that state which is beyond the dualities of the material world. So, uh, all the conditioned souls in this material world, being part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, can never experience transcendental happiness through material sense gratification. The tendency to experience happiness through material sense gratification is the main reason why we are here. Uh, it is not restricted to the species of human beings. It applies to all the 84 lakh species of material bodies. Those encaged souls in those 84 lakh species of material bodies, all of them are experiencing these problems of Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi and also suffering due to the dualities. But as soon as we regain our original identity, as soon as we regain our transcendental body, we can return to the spiritual abode and regain our association with the Supreme Lord to render transcendental devotional service to Him. And it is especially important to understand this because, as the Supreme Lord Himself says in Gita 15.7, Mama Ivam So Jivo Loke Jivo Bhuta Sanatana Manashastan Riyani Prakristani Karshati. The Supreme Lord says all the living entities are His part and parcel. However, the conditioned souls uh, are suffering due to this attachment with the six senses, which includes the mind. So, being part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, being eternal fragmental parts of the Supreme Lord, we can only experience happiness if the whole is satisfied. We are parts of the whole, we are parts of the Supreme. So, it is not possible for us to be happy if the Supreme Lord is not satisfied. So the best way to satisfy the Supreme Lord is through devotional service. Only when the Supreme Whole is satisfied, only then we, being the eternal fragmental parts, can also be satisfied and experience transcendental bliss. So that's why it is clearly stated here that material attachment and taking shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord go ill together. So no matter how much material opulence we may accumulate in this Dukalayam, everything will come to an end. And due to our ignorance of failing to realize the problems of life, namely Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadi, we will only end up wasting all the opportunities that we get, especially in this precious human form of life, if we are not able to understand the um, if we are not able to understand the importance of devotional service, then it is very unlikely for us to understand it when we take up another uh, potentially more degraded material body. It has also been described by Lord Brahma and the demigods that the human beings are truly blessed because though we are in this middle region of the material universe, the Bhumandal is in the middle region out of the 14 planetary systems. Though Lord Brahma occupies the topmost abode in the 14 planetary systems, he resides in Satyaloka, which is the topmost planet in the 14 planetary systems. Still, he also has to go through the even he has to go through the uh, problems of Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadi. As the Supreme Lord himself says uh, in Gita 8.16, A Brahma Bhuvana Loka, all the different planetary systems, all the 14 planetary systems within the material universe, all are places of misery. So even Lord Brahma himself, though he occupies a very exalted position out of all the Jiva Tattvas, Lord Brahma is regarded as the topmost Jiva Tattva. But still, even he is not immune to the problems of life. Even he is not immune to the uh, problems of Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadi. But compared to the demigods and even Lord Brahma himself, though they are occupying a superior position, still we, as human beings in the Bhumandal, in the middle region, we also get the chance to perform devotional service and attain the spiritual world from even this middle region itself. So that is a more advantageous position compared to the demigods and Lord Brahma, as they themselves say in the third canto. So, uh, the demigods, the sages, and Lord Brahma who occupy the upper planetary systems, even they have to uh, be engaged in devotional service to liberate themselves from this material universe. Um, Apart from what was spoken by the Supreme Lord in verse 15 point in verse 15.7 about the conditioned souls being his eternal fragmental parts. There's also another similar verse from uh, chapter 2 of Canto 1 Bhagavatam. It is from 1.2.6. Savai pumsam paro dharmo yato bhakti radokshate ahai tuki apratiyata yayatma suprasidati. The supreme occupation of dharma for all humanity is that by which man can attain to loving devotional service unto the transcendent Lord. Such devotional service must be unmotivated and uninterrupted to completely satisfy the self. So devotional service should be unmotivated and uninterrupted. Ahi tuki apratiyata, to completely satisfy the self. So in this verse from Bhagavatam 1.2.6, it has been described that the supreme occupation or dharma for all humanity is to attain to loving devotional service unto the transcendent Lord. And uh, true devotional service should be unmotivated and uninterrupted to completely satisfy the self. So this is another similar verse from the Bhagavatam about how we, as the eternal fragmental parts of the Supreme Lord, can only find satisfaction when the Supreme Whole is satisfied. Apart from that, also in Gita chapter 7, uh, in verses 7.16, 7.16 to 7.16 to 7.18, there are descriptions about the four types of people who surrender to the Supreme Lord. In 7.16, the Supreme Lord says, Chaturvida Vadanti Mam, Jana Sukirtanajana, Alto Jignasu Artati, Jnani Cha Bharatarshava. So, translation, O back me, the distress, the desire of wealth, the inquisitive. 7.15, the Supreme Lord talks about the four types of people who do not surrender unto Him. In 7.16 onwards, He talks about those who surrender unto Him, and these four types of people. Uh, Between these four types of people, there's a difference in terms of the purpose as to why they surrender to the Supreme Lord. So, the first category, the distressed, the desire; second, the desire of wealth, the inquisitive, and he who is searching for knowledge of the absolute. So, artho, the distressed, uh, artharti, the desire of wealth, the inquisitive, uh, jignasu, and he who is searching for knowledge of the absolute, the jnani. So, in this verse, the Supreme Lord mentions regarding these four types of people and the purpose as to why they surrender to Him. And in the next verse, in 7.17, the Supreme Lord says, Tesham jnani nityayukta eka bhaktir vishishyate priyo jnanyo kyartam aham sacha mama priyaha. Of these, the one who is in full knowledge and who is always engaged in pure devotional service is the best. For I am very dear to him and he is dear to me. Next, in 7.18, the Supreme Lord says, Udahara sarva evaite jnani tu atmaiva me matam ashtita sahi yuktatma mam emanuttamam gatim. All these devotees are undoubtedly magnanimous souls, but he who is situated in knowledge of me, I consider to be just like my own self. Being engaged in my transcendental service, he is sure to attain me, the highest and most perfect goal. So in 7.16, the four categories of people who surrender to the Supreme Lord have been mentioned. And though the Supreme Lord regards all these four types of people as Mahatmas, he especially regards the Jnani as the topmost of these four types of people, because the Jnani knows about the importance of rendering transcendental devotional service to the Supreme Lord. Compared to the three other categories like the distress, the desire of wealth, and the inquisitive. So these categories of people, though they surrender to Supreme Lord, but the unfortunate thing is that understand the they do not understand um, that true devotional service should be unmotivated and uninterrupted, as uh, as mentioned in Bhagavatam 1.2.6. Ahai tuki apratiyata. True devotional service should be unmotivated and uninterrupted. So, what is the problem with the remaining three categories? Compared to the Jnani, the three categories of people, the distress, the desire of wealth, and the inquisitive, they engage in devotional service, or they surrender to the Supreme Lord, or even to the demigods, with uh, with a purpose to gain temporary material benefits, whether it is to gain relief from distress, or whether to gain some some answers to their simple questions, or whether to gain material wealth. The unfortunate thing about these three categories of people, though they are regarded as Mahatmas, they do not understand that true devotional service should be Ahituki Apratiyata, unmotivated and uninterrupted. The purpose due to which they actually surrender to the Supreme Lord, or even to the demigods, is because they are seeking temporary material benefits, whether it is to gain relief from distress, or whether to gain material wealth. So the unfortunate thing is that they still do not have the knowledge. They are yet to be enlightened. That as long as they have material motivations uh, uh, in performing their devotional service, they can never liberate themselves from this material entanglement. So that is why the Supreme Lord also says in the Gita, chapter 13, the chapter begins with Arjuna's questions. He asks about six subject matters: Purusha Prakriti, Jnanam Nyayam, um, Purusha Prakriti, Jnanam Nyayam, and Purusha Prakriti, Jnanam Nyayam, and Kshetra Kshetrajna. So, chapter 13 begins with these questions by Arjuna about these six subject matters, and the Supreme Lord explains in detail about these six subject matters in chapter 13. So, one of the uh, uh, important questions asked by Arjuna in chapter 13 is regarding what is the meaning of jnanam, what is the meaning of knowledge itself. So, to which the Supreme Lord explains in verses 8 to 12 of chapter 13. So, in those verses, the Supreme Lord talks about 20 aspects which are to be regarded as knowledge. So, after describing about those 20 aspects, the Supreme Lord says that only these are to be regarded as true knowledge. Apart from this, everything else is regarded as ignorance. So, one of the important aspects mentioned by the Supreme Lord in those 20, the list of those 20 aspects is Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi Dukkha Doshanu Darshanam. So, the Supreme Lord talks about the importance of being able to perceive the evil of birth, death, old age, and disease. So due to bewilderment by uh, Maya, the conditioned souls are unable to understand the evil of Janmamrityu Jaravyadi, always running behind material sense gratification and this unceasing desire to always accumulate material wealth without knowing that the material wealth will be annihilated in no time. Still, uh, the so-called academic institutions are only imparting this type of knowledge about uh, how to work and accumulate material wealth. They do not address the areas of uh, how we can realize our true self and how to liberate ourselves from these problems of Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadi. So this so-called education system only ensures that we become better than cats and dogs in the business of eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. As a result, 3 out of the 4 categories of people who surrender to the Supreme Lord or even to the demigods, they do it with the wrong purpose. Unlike the Jnani, the 3 other categories like Artho Jignasul Artati, they surrender to the Supreme Lord seeking material benefits, temporary material benefits, though they are also likely to get it, as the Supreme Lord explains in verses 19 onwards, especially those who often seek material benefits, they tend to pray to demigods, and the Supreme Lord also explains that it is only due to His sanction that the demigods are able to deliver what is being requested um, by these devotees who seek material benefits. So, compared to the 4 types of people who do not surrender to Supreme Lord, at least these 4 types of people who at least surrender to Supreme Lord, they are still regarded as Mahatmas. But compared to the Jnani, the remaining 3 categories, they are in quite a disadvantageous position because they will not be able to completely liberate themselves from the problems of life in this material universe. As long as they are bewildered by the force of Maya, they will not be able to understand what uh, what true transcendental devotional service is all about, and as a result, they will still be trapped in this material entanglement, birth after birth, in different uh, material bodies. So it is especially even more unfortunate if we who are born as human beings in this precious human form of life, if we fail to understand the meaning of true transcendental devotional service, then we won't be able to, we may not be offered the opportunity to perform devotional service in this precious human form of life another time, because those who do not utilize this opportunity, and if they continue to let themselves be bewildered by Maya, they will only degrade themselves from the current position, from the default position of being in the mode of passion. They will only end up degrading themselves to the mode of ignorance, which results in uh, being born in lower species of life and also in the lower planetary systems, as explained in the Gita chapter 14 regarding the 3 modes of material nature. Uh, the conditioned souls who are born as human beings in this middle planetary system in the Bhumandal, by default we have the uh, by default we are influenced by the mode of passion, as the Supreme Lord also explains in Gita chapter 14. Though there's always competition between the 3 modes of material nature to uh, take control of the conditioned soul, by default, the human beings who are born in the middle planet, in the Bhumandal, are by default influenced by the mode of passion. So it is entirely up to the conditioned soul whether he or whether he wants to elevate himself from the mode of passion to the mode of goodness and then to pure goodness, or whether he wants to further degrade himself to the mode of ignorance and go back to the previous lower forms of life, probably in the lower planetary system. So only if we understand these um, distinctions between uh, the material world and the spiritual world, and also about the transcendence of devotional service to Supreme Lord. Unless we understand these things, we can never guide our spiritual journey in such a way that we can completely liberate ourselves from these problems of life in this material universe. So it is only due to our ignorance and our foolishness for wanting to be enjoyers and controllers that we have now landed in this uh, miserable place, this Dukkhalayam, the material world. But our actual place is in the spiritual world, in our transcendental body. We are supposed to be in the association with the Supreme Lord through transcendental devotional service. But due to our foolishness for wanting to be enjoyers and controllers, and the due to the tendency to enjoy material sense gratification, we have been degraded to this position where we are uh, being forced to uh, suffer the problems of Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadi, and also uh, we are also being under the various dualities in this material universe, and there are also the threefold miseries: Adhyatmic, Adevik, Adibautik. So, in search of material sense gratification, we have actually degraded ourselves to this position where we only end up uh, suffering, though we tend to think that we are actually enjoying. So, the Supreme Lord Himself has been merciful enough to give us this transcendental knowledge in the form of Krishna Katha, whether it is the Gita or Bhagavatam. So, only by understanding this distinction about why material attachment will not allow us to attain the spiritual abode, only if we understand this basic thing, we will not be able to guide our spiritual life in the way that it should be. So, back to the purport of 1.12.27. Devotional service to the Lord while existing in the material world is a way to practice one's transcendental relation with the Lord. And when it is matured, one gets completely free from all material attachment and becomes competent to go back home, back to Godhead. So, as mentioned in verse 1.2.6, the supreme occupation of human beings, especially, is to be engaged in transcendental devotional service, which is unmotivated and uninterrupted. So, though we are now engaged in this temporary material body, it is still uh, up to us whether we want to use it for the purpose of pleasing the Supreme Lord through devotional service, or to waste this wonderful opportunity seeking further material sense gratification only to degrade ourselves from this position to even lower forms of life. So, according to Srila Prabhupada, he often says that this is like making the best use of a bad bargain. So, though we are actually trapped in this Dukkhalayam, in this material body, we can still use it to practice devotional service, and as mentioned here, when it is matured, one gets completely free from all material attachment and becomes competent to go back home, back to God. So the more we, the more we are engaged in devotional service, the more we can free ourselves from material attachment, and we can distance ourselves from the risk of being born again in this material universe in another miserable form of life, because all the problems start from the desire to enjoy material sense gratification. Even in the Gita chapter 2 itself, the Supreme Lord explains in verses 2.62 and 2.63 about the 8 steps which lead to total destruction. So in those 2 verses, consisting of 4 lines in each verse, so there are total 8. The 8 steps towards total destruction has been described by the Supreme Lord in those 2 verses. In 2.62, the Supreme Lord says, Jayato Vishan Pumsam Sangateshu Upajayate, Sangat Sanjayate Kamat, Kamakrodo Abjayate, Krodat Bhavati Sammoha, Sammoha Smriti Viprama, Smriti Brahmshat Bhuttinasho, Bhuttinashat Pranashyati. Jayato Vishan Pumsam. So the first step, Dhyayato Vishayan Pumsam, when the senses contemplate on sense objects, Sangateshu Upajayate, it leads to attachment. From contemplation on sense objects, it leads to attachment. Sangat Sanjayate Kamat, from attachment, it leads to lusty desires. Kama Krodho Abhyayate, when such desires are unfulfilled, it leads to anger. Krudat Bhavati Sammoha, from anger, it leads to bewilderment. Sammoha Smriti Viprama, from there, it leads to destruction of memory. Smriti Brahmshat Buddhi Nasho, when memory is lost, intelligence is also destroyed. Buddhi Nashat Pranashyati, when intelligence is destroyed, it leads to total destruction. So, from these 2 verses in the Gita, the Supreme Lord clearly explains about how the mere contemplation of the senses, of the material senses, on sense objects, which consists of nothing but dead matter, merely due to that contemplation, uh, it leads to this. It leads to the risk of total destruction over 8 steps. So the more we, the more we remain ignorant or pretend to be ignorant about this, the more likely we are to be trapped further in the material entanglement, and it will only result in us finding ourselves in a much more degraded, lower species of life in the next birth. But if we fully utilize this wonderful opportunity given by the Supreme Lord to be engaged in devotional service to Him, then we can liberate ourselves and regain our transcendental body to go back home, back to God. So this distinction uh, has to be very clear to those who actually want to liberate themselves from the problems of life in this Dukkhalayam. So that is why the Supreme Lord especially mentions that out of the 4 types of people who surrender to him, Arto Jignasu Ratati Jnani. So out of the 4 categories of people, though all 4 are regarded as Mahatmas due to the fact that they all surrender to him, still the Supreme Lord personally prefers the Jnani who actually knows about uh, about the absolute truth, and he also knows he is the Jnani is engaged in devotional service for the right purpose, because even the Supreme Lord himself, as he acknowledges in Gita 14.7, that we, the conditioned souls, who are his eternal fragmental parts, we are actually suffering. So he himself is uh, anxious to have us back in the spiritual world. So he himself does not want us to suffer in this Dukkalayam. That's why he has made it very clear in the Gita, in every chapter, about why one should um, aspire to go back home, back to God. So, apart from this distinction between uh, material attachment and devotional service, in this purport, Srila Prabhupada also explains about uh, how we can perform devotional service. Continuation of the purport, Maharaja Parikshit, being especially attached to the Lord from the beginning of his body in the womb of his mother, was continuously under the shelter of the Lord, and the so called warning of his death within 7 days from the date of the curse by the Brahmana's son was a boon to him to enable him to prepare himself to go back home, back to Godhead. So, even the curse by the Brahmana's son, though it is um for any conditioned soul who, uh, especially the bewildered conditioned souls who may find uh, himself in the position of Maharaj Parikshit, will only be uh, will only be very dejected upon knowing that uh, he has only 7 days to live. But Maharaj Parikshit made the right decision to renounce his kingdom and spend the remaining 7 days of his life to be completely absorbed in devotional service to the Supreme Lord. So, how did he actually perform devotional service to the Supreme Lord? Simply by uh, being engaged in Shravanam. So, he was hearing Krishna Katha, he was hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam from Sukadeva Goswami. So, this so called curse by the Brahmana son was actually a blessing in disguise because, uh, unlike Maharaja Parikshit, we do not know uh, our exact departure date. But Maharaja Parikshit, being an exalted devotee who was always protected by the Supreme Lord since the time of his birth, even when he was in the womb of his mother. So, as we have seen in the previous verse, in one of the verses, Maharaja Parikshit is also described as Vishnu Ratha, the one who was protected by Lord Vishnu, because Maharaja Parikshit was protected by the Supreme Lord's four-handed uh, Vishnu form when he was being attacked by the Brahmastra released by Ashwatthama. So from the time of his birth, from the time when he was in his mother's womb, he was always being protected by the Supreme Lord, and the the vision, the glance which he got of the Supreme Lord was another blessing by the Supreme Lord, which enabled Maharaj Parikshit to be always engaged in smaranam. So the meaning of the name Parikshit, there are two meanings to his name. One is that he was examined, he was uh, forced to undergo such devastating attack even before his birth, even when he was in his mother's womb. So he was able to surpass uh, that attack. And another meaning to his name is that uh, Parishit also means that uh, he himself was always examining in his life, and he would try to recall the glance of the Supreme Lord, which he saw when he was in his mother's womb. So, um, through that, Maharaja Parikshit uh, was always meditating upon the form of the Supreme Lord, the Vishnu form which he saw in his mother's womb. So, throughout his life, he was also engaged in Smaranam, remembrance of the Supreme Lord. So, as described by um, Prahlad Maharaja, there are 9 forms of devotional service, the Navavida Bhakti: Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, Smaranam, Padasevanam, Archanam, Vandanam, Dashyam, Sakyam, Atmanivedanam. So, we can perform devotional service in any of these 9 forms, and according to Srila Prabhupada, it is not necessary for everyone to perform all 9 of these processes, we can attain perfection simply by being engaged in any one of the 9 processes. Because from the example of Maharaja Parikshit, uh, we can clearly see that he attained perfection by being engaged in Shravanam. He was hearing Krishna Katha spoken by Sukadeva Goswami, and Sukadeva Goswami attained perfection by speaking Krishna Katha, so he was engaged in Kirtanam. Apart from that, there are also many other examples, uh, as we can clearly see from the Srimad Bhagavatam itself, and also from the epics Ramayana and Mahabharata, about how many of the exalted devotees were always engaged in devotional service to the Supreme Lord in any one of these 9 processes. Even from uh, the Ramayana, we can see that when Lord Rama was sent into exile, uh, Maratha Bharat, though uh, he was given the opportunity to rule, he was engaged in performing Pada Sevanam to Lord Rama. And similarly, there are many other examples of many of the exalted personalities who were great devotees of the Supreme Lord. So, Srimad Bhagavatam, though it is known as the Bhagavata Purana, it is not merely about Bhagavan himself alone, but it is also about the Mahabhagavatas, the great exalted devotees of the Supreme Lord, and their loving interactions with the Supreme Lord himself. So, the importance of studying Srimad Bhagavatam is that we can understand how we can also follow the footsteps of these Mahabhagavatas, whether it's Maharaja Parikshit or Prahlada Maharaja, mm, and also many other exalted devotees. So we can follow their footsteps to be engaged in uh, pure transcendental devotional service, so that we do not waste this precious human form of life. So Maharaja Parikshit, as he was blessed by the Supreme Lord to get that glance of his 400 Vishnu form, so that also enabled him to be always engaged in Smaranam. He was always recalling the form of the Supreme Lord. And apart from that, this curse by the Brahmana's son, uh, though it appears to be a curse, but it is the biggest blessing one could ever get, because unlike us, he was blessed with the opportunity to know when exactly is his departure date. So he was able to prepare in such a way that he would be completely absorbed in the thought of the Supreme Lord when he leaves his body. And that's what the Supreme Lord also explains in Gita chapter 8, from 8.5 to 8.8. In uh, Gita 8.5, the Supreme Lord says, Antakale cha mameva smaran muktva kalevaram, ya prayati samadbhavam, yati nashti atta samshaya. Those who remember the Supreme Lord at the time of death will attain his transcendental nature, the spiritual world. And also in 8.6, the Supreme Lord says, Yam yamapi smaran bhavam, tyajanti kalevaram, tam tam eva iti kaunteya sadatat bhava vahita. So in 8.6, the Supreme Lord says that uh, those who remember, uh, as they remember certain forms when uh, at the time of leaving their body, uh, people will be uh, regaining that form in the next birth. So that is even more important. Uh, that is that is why it's even more important to be completely disengaged from this tendency to always enjoy material sense gratification, because unless we are absorbed in devotional service throughout our life, we will not be able to remember the Supreme Lord at the time of death. Though the Supreme Lord says in 8.5 that those who remember him at the time of death can attain the spiritual world, it is not to be misunderstood that we can spend our entire life being engaged in material sense gratification, and we can remember him only at the time of death. That's why in Gita 8.7, he further clarifies when he says Tasmat Sarveshu Kaleshu Mam Anusmara Yudhyacha. Maya Arpita Mano Buddhir Mam Evaishasya Samshaya. Though the Supreme Lord said in Gita 8.5 that those who remember him at the time of death can attain the spiritual world, he further clarifies in 8.7 saying that therefore Tasmat Sarveshu Kaleshu Mam Anusmara Yudhyacha. Therefore always remember me and perform your duty of fighting. Though this instruction was meant for Arjuna, it also applies to us because the meaning of fighting in the context of the battle of Kurukshetra, Arjuna was supposed to fight against the enemy, and we, the conditioned souls who are suffering in this material world, we are also fighting this uh, incessant tendency to always enjoy material sense gratification and also the force of Maya. We are also fighting against these enemies in this material world. So that's why the Supreme Lord says, Tasmat Sarveshu Kaleshu Ma Manusmara Yudhyacha. The instruction applies to all of us. And the Supreme Lord clearly says, Tasmat Sarveshu Kaleshu. Though in 8.5, he said that those who remember him at the time of death can attain the spiritual abode. Still, he clarifies in 8.7 that it is important to always remember him. Only if we always remember him by being absorbed in devotional service, only then we can be prepared to remember him at the time of death. So Maharaja Parikshit was being an exalted devotee. He was blessed by the so-called curse because he knew the exact date of his departure, and he had enough time, the 70 period, to be fully engaged in Shravanam of Krishna Katha, the Srimad Bhagavatam. So the Supreme Lord ensured that his devotee was blessed with this opportunity to go back home, back to Godhead. So, apart from being engaged in Shravanam, there are also many other processes of devotional service which we can perform according to time, place, and circumstances. But the easiest processes of devotional service which we can perform out of the nine are obviously Shravanam and Kirtanam. So Maharaja Parikshit was being engaged in Shravanam, but it was not like he was simply hearing. He, it was not like he was passively hearing. He was also inquiring uh, further from Shukadev Goswami. So even when we look at the first chapter of Canto 1 itself, questions by the sages, the entire discourse of Srimad Bhagavatam begins with the questions of the sages of Naimisaranya. Only because they asked these questions, Sutta Goswami also spoke the Srimad Bhagavatam as he heard it from the discourse between Maharaja Parikshit and Sukadev Goswami. So, uh, Shravanam need not necessarily mean passive hearing. Uh, Truly exalted devotees who are really interested about Krishna Katha be will also have the inquisitiveness to always inquire more and more about uh, Krishna Katha and also the processes of devotional service. So, uh, Shravanam Kirtanam are the easiest processes of devotional service to perform. So, as long as we are engaged in uh, sessions of Krishna Katha, whether it is the session on Gita or Bhagavatam, and also when we perform our japa, and also if we ourselves uh, deliver sessions on Gita and Bhagavatam, so we are also being engaged in Kirtanam. So these two processes, Shravanam and Kirtanam, when they are performed together, it will easily enable us to also be engaged in Smaranam, because whether we hear Krishna Katha or whether we speak Krishna Katha, so the more we teach about Krishna Katha, we ourselves can also be engaged in Shravanam while teaching Krishna Katha, and it also enables us to uh, remember the Supreme Lord always. So the first three processes out of the Navida Bhakti processes are the easiest to perform. So compared to these three processes, the other processes are slightly more elaborate and may be difficult to perform based on the time, place, and circumstances, because the other more elaborate processes like Archanam Vandanam, whether if it's deity worship, more paraphernalia is required. So it all depends on the time, place, and circumstances. But uh, simply by hearing Krishna Katha, as what Maharaja Parikshit did, uh, we can be always absorbed in devotional service. That is the easiest and the least we could do to uh, always ensure that we are on track in our spiritual journey. Since he was always protected by the Lord, he could have avoided the effect of such a curse by the grace of the Lord. But he did not take such undue advantage for nothing. Rather, he made the best use of a bad bargain. For 7 days continuously, he heard Srimad Bhagavatam from the right source, and thus he got shelter at the lotus feet of the Lord by that opportunity. The Supreme Lord gave the opportunity to Maharaja Parikshit. If it was someone else, some other, maybe uh, Maharaja Parikshit was the ruler of the entire Jambudvipa and even beyond. He expanded the kingdom of Hastinapura to even greater uh, length and breadth compared to his predecessors like Maharaja Yudhishthira. So, um, as explained in Gita 4.13, the Varnas are actually based on gunas and karmas and not by birth. So, different Varnas uh, are actually under the influence of different gunas. The Brahmanas are under the influence of uh, the mode of goodness. The Kshatriyas are in under the influence of the mode of passion. The Vaishyas are under the influence of the mixed modes of passion and ignorance, and the Shudras are under the influence of the mode of ignorance. So, by default, a Kshatriya is uh, often under the influence of the mode of passion. However, exalted devotees like Maharaja Parikshit or even Maharaja Yudhishthira, they were never obsessed with this material wealth. They merely regarded themselves as representatives of the Supreme Lord. Even Maharaja Yudhishthira was uh, was enthroned by the Supreme Lord as the ruler of Hastinapura, because the Pandavas never regarded themselves as the supreme rulers with demoniac uh, tendencies like the Kauravas. They were the complete antithesis of the Kauravas. So uh, that's why the Supreme Lord uh, blessed the Pandavas and enthroned Maharaja Yudhishthira, and the Supreme Lord also ensured that Maharaja Parishit, being the grandson, could actually continue the lineage of these pious kings. So it was the nature of Maharaja Parishit himself, being an exalted devotee of the Supreme Lord. Though he was a king, he was a saintly king, and he made the best use of this opportunity. He did not um, further, he did not waste those 7 days. He renounced his kingdom, and he made the best use of a bad bargain. For 7 days continuously, he heard Srimad Bhagavatam from the right source, and thus he got shelter at the lotus feet of the Lord by that opportunity. So here, Srila Prabhupada clearly mentions that for 7 days continuously, he heard Srimad Bhagavatam from the right source. He heard it from Shukdev Goswami, who heard the Srimad Bhagavatam from his father, Vyasadev. So it is also especially important to note that though we are being engaged in Shravanam Kirtanam and the Navavida Bhakti processes, these should be in line with the scriptural injunctions which have been uh, passed down through the bona fide disciplic succession. So it is important to hear Krishna Katha from the right source, especially in uh, the Sanatani Hindu community. It is very prevalent to see people always desiring to learn about the scriptures only from cinema, serial, and WhatsApp University. So that will also not guide us in the right direction in our spiritual journey. It is important to hear and also study the scriptures from the right source. So even if it is even when it comes to studying the Gita, we should follow the bona fide and authentic source like Bhagavad Gita as it is. And also in Srimad Bhagavatam, Srila Prabhupada has worked on almost 18,000 of these verses, even up to the 10th canto. He wrote these extensive purports to help us understand Krishna Katha uh, according to the bona fide parampara. So, though we may get the opportunity to be engaged in Shravanam, it should we should also make sure that we hear it from the right source. Only then we can get shelter at the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord. So that's all for this session. Uh, the next session will continue with verse 28 from the 12th chapter. Hare Krishna.